For 10 years, from 2004 to 2014, I was member of India's Planning Commission. Planning Commission was a concept that was developed and became a very important part of India's polity in 1950, and its visionary was Jawaharlal Nehru. Planning Commission's purpose was to plan for the country, and for 10 years in two Planning Commission cycles, the 11th plan and the 12th plan, we wrote the 11th and the 12th plan. And the whole idea was that in planning for the next 5 years, you involved the country, you had a transparent process, so people knew what was the plan the government had, and the plan was declared and the resources were allocated. So the whole idea then was that government should be held accountable for what it had promised and what it failed to deliver. It was also a way of helping the states. All the states did not have their own resources. It was called SOR, States Own Resources. So some states had resources, for example, Gujarat, Maharashtra had a lot of resources, but some states like Meghalaya, like Nagaland, like Tripura, like Manipur, they had to be handheld and helped. So Planning Commission was, in a sense, tried to balance the fact that all states are not that well endowed. So we as Planning Commission members sat on state plan confrontational discussions with the states. On one side there were the states. For example, let me take this example of Gujarat. Okay, so Gujarat headed by the Chief Minister sat on one side of the table, and Planning Commission members and some senior officers. So they spoke a lot about how wonderful Gujarat, vibrant Gujarat, the most, the best performing states. Then there was another scenario. On one side was, for example, Manipur, and on the other side were Planning Commission with the same dignity, the same respect. All states were equal, but all states were not equally well to do. So now what happened was that this whole democratization of planning, which is what Planning Commission, I served 2 terms in the Planning Commission. By my second term, we were involving very actively civil society. People who worked at the ground level, we were involving them to tell us before the plan was written what they would like to see, what would they like to see, for example, in tribals, or what would they like to see for primitive, denotified, very vulnerable tribes. Yani you drilled down to the lowest common denominator and asked them what would they like to see. Women, health, education, these are big issues, but then there were also the people who are generally ignored in the planning process. We tried to get the people who really know, who have their ear to the ground, because no matter how much I toured around the country, what somebody who lives, for example, in Chizami or in Makokchung in Nagaland, what they know about it, I won't know. So the whole point was to, now then there was this one, the present dispensation came into power, and the Prime Minister was never a very happy person when he spoke to us in the planning. Every year I saw him for 10 years in a row sitting across the table. He was always a little miffed at the Planning Commission. And when we asked him questions, because it was our business to ask questions, I think that also was somehow irked him. So at the end of the day, when this present regime came into power, the first thing they did was that they got rid of the Planning Commission. So Planning Commission in one stroke, the board was taken down, Planning Commission, another board went up, Niti Aayog, chalo, nomenclature is changed, that's okay. But the hardest blow was that financial powers were all taken away. So it became a glorified advisory body. And when it became an advisory body, so what clout did it have? We could say to the finance ministry, do this, and finance ministry sat up and listened. Now finance ministry was all in all, because you see, we were tried to do, of course we were not, there were many problems, and we perhaps didn't perform as well as we could have or we should have, but we had a bird's eye view of everything, whereas finance ministry is in the nitty gritty. Now the finance ministry was all in all, planning commission was merely an advisory. And the other thing which happened was that everything became very opaque. The whole transparency of, we had something called the civil society windows. If there were dams being built in Sikkim on Teesta River, and there was huge environmental degradation, and people were, there were groups, civil society groups, that were continuously writing. Okay, so we held a civil society window in which all these groups came and they deposed, and we listened to them as a planning commission. Some members were more active, some were not, but so the sunwai, the word is sunwai. So they had a hearing, and so when we went into the planning table to allocate resources, we could say, see, I mean, this is what we have heard from the ground. So here is a classic example of dismantling an institution. Other institutions were not dismantled, but that's only a nomenclature. Where is the power and the dignity of NHRC? Where is the power and dignity of the Minorities Commission? Where is the Women's Commission? Where is the Scheduled Caste and Scheduled Tribes Commission? The whole idea that these commissions were strong and together they formed a very strong human rights statement, that whole idea was totally and completely negated and thrown out.